Oh, well, I think we're getting close to getting started here. I don't know if any more folks are trickling in. We've got 12 people in the room. Renee, you ready to spin this up? Go ahead and
Yeah,
introduce.
for sure. Um, how do we want to do this? I guess the first thing is I see people are starting to fill out the attendance sheet on the Google Doc, and so if you haven't done that, please go ahead and do that. We have like a small number of participants. We probably could do a round table. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be a good way to start this off. And First of all, we are pretty much all in this Kiko chat and Zoom environment where there's a Google Doc available if you didn't directly link in to the Zoom room. Um, but there will be um, various individuals who will keep notes if we go to breakout groups. We'll just make sure that one person takes notes and kind of saves what we do for posterity. Other than that, I don't think we have any other logistical items to hit. I would like to introduce the cluster and then I think just go to a quick roundtable. We're at 12 people and I think that'll work out. Yeah, you're right. So welcome to the Esip Winter Meeting Enviro Sensing Cluster working session. And I'm Scotty Strachan. I'm from the University of Nevada, Reno. The chair of this session is Renee Brown, and she and I are co-chairs of this cluster. I wanted a chance to kind of pitch it a little bit to those of you who haven't come into our cluster very much or at all. We're an open group of scientists where we're focused on the best practices for environmental sensing, particularly in situ, so not remote or satellite sensing nearly as much as we're interested in what's going on with sensors on the ground or near the surface. Our group is a very kind of eclectic combination of people who work in academia, government agencies, NGOs. We have students, we have senior researchers, we're all over the map, but we are all interested in working together to move the science forward, both in the technology and in the practices. So we focus on things like field and software tool development. So sometimes it's sensor development, sometimes it's software development. We collaborate and share pretty openly across this group in our activities over the course of the year. We meet monthly, typically monthly, I should say. We're not meeting in February due to this meeting right here and now, but normally it's the first Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. You can find that information and link in through the Esip website. Look for the Enviro Sensing Cluster wiki page. Students are always welcome. We've always had great student fellows. This year is no exception. And we also really encourage folks, if you're here and you run a lab and you have students in your group and you know that you won't be able to make our first Tuesday meetings all the time, feel free to send your students because they will probably meet interesting people and learn some things and no doubt contribute back. So that's our cluster in a nutshell. And what we normally do in our calls is we do a little quick intro and roundtable so everyone knows who they're engaging. We have 14 participants, which means that that's a great ideal number for doing the roundtable before we get into our topic. So I'm going to go ahead and start off, and I'm going to read through the participants list as Zoom is showing it to me. So we'll see how that goes. Again, I'm Scotty Strachan, University of Nevada, Reno. I'm Director of Cyber Infrastructure in IT at that institution, and I also run a number of mountain climate and hydrology sensor networks in the Great Basin. So next, I'm going to go to the chair of this session. Renee, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, and if you wouldn't mind unsharing your screen so we can see everybody, that would be cool. Yeah, so welcome everybody. I think we know most of you, but to the newcomers, welcome. to the session. And as Scotty said, I'm co-chair of this cluster. I'm based at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, where I am the information manager for the McMurdo Dry Valley's long-term ecological research site. And I'm also the director of technology at the university's Savietta Field Station. And also in this roundtable, if you could just briefly state your interest in the topic that we're going to be discussing today, that would be nice to hear about as well. Thanks.
All right, thanks, May. We're going to go to Christina Faust.
All right, yeah, it's nice to meet everyone. I am the Esip EnviroSensing Community Fellow, and I am from the University of California, Santa Barbara Geography Department, and my research interests include wildfire ecology and management.
Great, and we're so glad Christina's with us this year as the student fellow. Yay, go Christina. All right, moving over to Cindy Lynn.
Hey everyone, I'm Cindy and I'm the Esip Community Fellow for the Machine Learning Research Cluster. I'm currently in my 6th year in the School of Information at the University of Michigan, and my research interests, I work with data scientists and engineers who are trying to develop predictive technologies for peatland fires in Borneo.
Welcome, Cindy. Okay, over to Ethan McMahon.
Hi there, I'm Ethan McMahon. I'm with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, long-time member of this group. I'm trying to help communities use environmental data to make decisions, in particular air quality data, but also expanding that out to climate change data. So I'm all ears.
All right, thanks, Ethan. Over to Joseph Bell, who has a great background.
Thanks. Yeah, so Joseph Bell from USGS out of Baltimore. I work with the Next Generation Water Observing System and the NGWAS program, as well as the Observing Systems Division. And my focus for them is to develop a readiness evaluation plan and a transition. How do you transition or diffuse those instruments that tested ready into the broader workforce? My focus is on the wireless radio frequency monitoring heavy this year, so it would be great to see if there's a direction we can steer the cluster in that, kind of specifically on the LoRa side. But more broad, right? The radio frequency monitoring is huge.
Martha.
Oh, hi. I'm Martha Apple, and I'm a biology professor at Montana Tech in Butte, Montana. And my background is the Pioneer Mountains here in Montana. And it's one of the places where I have a Gloria site, and hopefully my soil temperature sensors are recording temperatures hourly from this background here, but only in real life. Anyway, I'm interested in plant responses to climate change and microhabitat. And in order to study that, I have some sensor projects going on in collaboration with James Gallagher, among others. And we're looking at ways of developing sensor networks, also improving ways of finding teeny tiny sensors that are buried in pattern ground that you might not be able to locate very easily, and that can move with the soil. So during freeze-thaw cycles. So there you have it, and it's good to be here.
All right, welcome, Martha. And over to Megan Carter.
Technical difficulties with the tech host, unmuting. Okay, Megan Carter, I'm ESIP's community director. I've been in this role for almost 3 years now. I have the pleasure of working with ESIP's 30 plus themed collaboration areas. My background is in low temperature geochemistry, the intersection of earth science and public health. And I love working in ESIP and thinking about how to make good decisions based on good data. And that involves collaborating and making connections. So I'm really glad to be here with you all today and to see what you have to share.
I'm glad you're hanging out with the cool kids, Megan. All right, over to Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel Fuca. I work for a research scientist with the Virginia Tech University in the Biological Systems Engineering Department. Most of my research is in coupling the atmosphere with this surface for watershed hydrology type of problems. And my interest in the cluster is in actually being able to build up for many different purposes, small, inexpensive, and rapidly deployable sensors for various reasons. And my interest in this session specifically is I believe this is a great place to find test rats. Wait, no, what's the term? People to go through the first time in various various training sessions on the new and wonderful microcontrollers that are coming in place.
All right, very good. Thank you, Daniel. And let's go to Lisa Dallas. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, thanks. My name's Lisa Dallas. I work at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, and currently I'm serving as the Data and Information Systems Manager for the GLOBE program. I don't know who's familiar with that, but it's a 25-year-old science education program geared towards students in grades K through 12, but we also have a citizen science component and a phone app, but I'm also interested in possibilities for incorporating low-cost sensors for citizen scientists to make environmental measurements. So, thank you.
Thank you. And hopefully you'll be able to help us out as we with our topic as we go over this micro tutorials challenge we're all facing here. Okay, to Micah. Micah, welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm new to this cluster. I was actually mostly interested in learning a little bit more about what you all do. I'm with NOAA. I work for the US IU's office. So we're heavily geared on ocean observations and data management thereof. My role is the DMAC data management system architect. So I am involved with developing standards for data dissemination and leading the larger IU's community of data management workers. More recently, I've gotten involved a little bit more on the sensing side, I guess, trying to lead a project to look at ways to ingest some of our data directly into cloud service providers. So looking at some of the technologies there. And I guess I'm interested in learning more about working with some of the protocols that are in existence in this community, like MQTT and things like that, and just kind of learning what's out there. So I'm not really qualified to talk too much about environmental sensors, but I'm interested to learn. That's it.
Well, thank you for the intro. And actually, you know, there is a subset of this group that does work in software infrastructures and plays with cutting edge transmission protocols and things like that. So I think you'll probably fit right in over the course of the year if you drop in on some of these. So fantastic, thank you. All right, over to Steve Young. Steve, welcome.
Hey, Scotty, thanks. I assume you can hear me. Yeah. So I'm Steve Young, former Environmental Protection Agency employee, 30 plus years. I work mostly on information management, information technology, information policy issues over those 30 years. I know Ethan McMahon, who's also on and still at EPA. I have a strong interest in biodiversity, citizen science, and so I think about the role of environmental sensing to help us better understand and support citizen scientists out there. And as many of you know, I'm also very interested in revisiting the idea of environmental right to know, you know, the basic right that people have to understand the condition of their environment, you know, with good spatial, temporal, and compositional resolutions. So I see, again, the sensors would play a key role in that. So thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, over to James Gallagher.
Hey, I'm James Gallagher. I'm the president of OpenDAP, which is a not-for-profit software corporation that develops data infrastructure for science data. And I'm also part of the sensor project that my wife Martha mentioned earlier. We're building low ROS sensor nodes that can communicate with each other and then send data up to the internet over Iridium satellites. And that's a project we have going on with Montana Tech and the engineering department there.
Great. Thank you, James.
Thanks.
Okay, next we'll go to Jason Sharp.
Hey there. I'm I work at NCEI, NCEI. I'm an archive metadata specialist there. I've been there for about 6 months. This is my second ESIP. I don't know much about hands-on sensors, so my interest here is kind of cursory. So looking forward to learn more.
Welcome aboard. We're glad you're here. Okay, and we'll go to Robert Rivendo.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm a ESIP Collaboration Areas member since 2019. I serve in a number of aerospace organizations internationally as well as nationally, as well as semantic technology groups. I'm a member of the NASA Datanauts, which is formed through the Office of the Chief Information Officer, which is a collaborative group. And my interest in sensor training is related to my interest in satellite data, specifically for astronautics, so space flight and the orbital environment. And yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for coming in, Robert, and hopefully we'll see a little bit more of you around. But with that, we've gone through everyone that's on the call at the moment. And at this point, we're ready to dive into the meat of our topic. And so I'm going to turn it over to the session chair, that's Renee Brown, and she will go ahead and take it from here.
Great, thanks. And yeah, again, welcome. I'm going to share my screen for a few minutes just to kind of orient us to our session today. It's going to be pretty laid back, and it's mainly a brainstorming session about the future direction of our cluster. And that is a lot guided by your interests. Everybody's here today and what your interests are. So, and glad to see some newcomers, and yeah, so let me see if I can do this. We were challenged in my last meeting, the other meeting that I'm attending today, if we could share our screen without talking about it. And I think that's very difficult to do. So, so this is our Google Doc for the meeting, and I see that a few of you still haven't checked in here. So if you wouldn't mind putting in your info, that would be awesome, just so we can have that record of who was here and maybe follow up with people as desired. So we've already done some of the welcoming. Of course, ESIP has some community guidelines that you can look at here. I put a few resources on the second page here. So this is a link to our cluster webpage. Some useful information here, including some sensor best practices that were developed early on in this cluster. And so for those of you who don't have a lot of experience with sensor networks, this is a good place to start by looking at those best practices. Of course, some of them may be outdated now, but it's a good start. And we talk about everything in this group from the field to data management. And we have experts in this group that sort of specialize in those different categories, as you might have guessed from the introductions. We also have a mailing list that we encourage you to subscribe to. That link is on that webpage. And we don't send out a lot of messages, but we've got close to 300 members now. And so it's a good community to get information from or share knowledge. Our next cluster call will be on March 2nd at 2 p.m. Pacific time and 5 p.m. Eastern. Our meetings are typically the first Tuesday of the month at this time. So I'm moving down to the next page. So today, what we are going to focus on, it's largely going to be a brainstorming exercise for developing online micro tutorials and teaching topics specific to environmental sensing. And just to give a little bit of background on this, so with COVID, the few opportunities that do exist for in-person hands-on sensor workshops have pretty much gone away. I myself teach one at the Sevietta every other year or so that focuses on Campbell Scientific Data Loggers and wireless telemetry networks and basic electronics and things of that nature. We've been doing that since 2012. We had to cancel it last year, and we also are going to cancel it this year because we cannot offer it safely due to COVID. There's a lot of field components to that course. And meanwhile, in this cluster over the past year or two, there's been a lot of interest in low-cost open source technologies. So Arduino, LoRa, and other things of that nature. And there has been some discussion among some cluster members about how can we convert some of these online training or in-person trainings to online trainings. And initially I wanted to bring in some folks who had some experience in converting their course to virtual, and didn't get a lot of response to that. The people that I did hear back from basically said it was an awful experience and they don't recommend it. So we decided that instead, it might be better to think about creating short videos. And and that was promoted by a cluster member. I see there's a couple things in the chat. Let me see if I can, okay. Yeah, so that's the background, basically to see if the cluster is interested in becoming or developing a resource for such videos. And so what we'd like to do today is focus on these discussion topics that I have outlined here, specifically who is our target audience. For example, is this agency scientists, academics, technical hobbyists, students, farmers, anybody else that I forgot. Likely our target audience is a balance, potential applications as well. A lot of us do research. And so, of course, those of us who do research are motivated by those applications. But I know those of you who are working with atmospheric sensors may have a different approach and so on. So anyway, we want to talk about that, what skill levels we're going to be targeting, what's the focus, specific topics that we might want to focus on. Laura keeps coming up in this group, so that might be one to discuss. And then there's also this idea of, well, it's, if you're new to this, like what things would be useful to people. So for example, in my course, the very first day, we teach people how to use a multimeter to check battery voltages, and we have them do this exercise. And so that might be a good video to do. Next discussion point is, where should the videos be hosted? YouTube, for example, might be a good place to put the videos. Data repositories might be another place. But ideally, I think we want to put these resources in a single place that people can access. In terms of resources that might already exist, we like to get some more feedback about that. I put a couple links here. I guess I have those up. So Matt Bartos is a cluster member and a previous student fellow, and he pointed us to this website, which is really cool. I think this is kind of what we're talking about here, where we have techniques and maybe even some other things. So So that's that. And then the other link that I put on here. So I'm involved with, through my field station work, I'm involved with this organization for biological field stations. And they got some funding from NSF to develop this virtual field project. And it's pretty cool. They've basically gotten money to develop best practices for creating videos. There's ecosystem exploration videos are one of the main efforts that they've been focusing on. So basically targeted towards students who can't get out to the field and showing them some different ecosystems. And then they are also doing these live from the field events. And we did one at Sevieta here in New Mexico on nutrient cycling in grasslands. And we were given very specific instructions about what equipment to use and how long it could be and what the person was supposed to talk about. And so even though this is a little bit different than what we're talking about here, I think there could be some overlap in best practices. And so that's the next discussion point. And then we should talk about what the template should look like. And that's getting at like how long, what are like the key things people need to touch on in their video and so on. And also we think that, there should be some Esip and cluster branding in there. We'd like to know if anybody has experience in media production, who has some good ideas about this. And these templates should ideally refer back to the best practices that we've already developed. For example, somebody brought up in a previous conversation about this, talking about what's your data management plan and how can we make real-time data more fair. So that's getting more into the data side of things. And then Steve Young had brought up before that this issue of policy, and that's something that is a big focus of ESIP as an organization. And so how can what we're doing inform decision making? And then finally, another one of our cluster members, Mike Daniels, who couldn't make it here today since his regrets, had brought up that we might want to consider funding opportunities. The ESIP lab is a good option. I think the deadline has already passed for this cycle, but we could consider it for a future one. And then is there anything else that I forgot? I see some people put some things up here, but yeah, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and we have 14 people. So, I mean, I still think it would be worthwhile to do at least 2 breakout groups. So what do you think, Scotty?
I think we could do, like 3. If we did 3,
3.
that would be closer to 5 people per.
Yeah.
Chance to contribute.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. So like 3 breakout groups, and the idea is, so in the document, if you scroll down, I realize I'm not sharing my screen anymore, but if you scroll down, there's a notes page for each group. And really, it's a brainstorming session. And if your group can hit all the topics, great. If there's some topics that are of more interest in the group than others, great. This is pretty low key, laid back. So yeah, but before we do that, yeah, questions, Ethan?
Sure, yeah. Can you just give us the prompt a little bit more clearly? Like, do you want to have us think about this if it's going to be a session at the next ESIP meeting, or is this going to be standalone, or what?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sorry, I'm not very good. I've been running some meetings for another organization, and I'm like, oh, go into breakout groups, and then like people are like, what are we supposed to do? So yeah, I think some of the aims here are, is this something that people are interested in? Is it worth doing? And if it is, you know, like, let's talk about some of these topics and think about a timeline. I don't think at the moment this is going to be like a cluster activity, something that we would work on over the course of the year. And if we get far enough along, maybe we can apply for funding to maybe get a media expert in or something like that. But mainly today, I think we're just trying to get a sense of where we can go with this, because I think there has been a lot of interest in not just this cluster, but in the broader community of like, I want to learn how to use Arduino, I want to learn how to use LoRa, but I don't know where to begin. And so if we as a cluster can try to begin to facilitate that, then that would be cool. Scotty.
Yeah, and to expand on that just a little bit, the conversations that we've had leading up to this session basically are those of us doing environmental science and trying to apply some of these, newer technologies that may have not come from a field related to ours, or maybe they are, right? So we bring this perspective of what has worked in our field and what are the typical failure modes that we see for sensors or for the data workflow or for wireless telemetry. And we are really hoping that if we choose to do these micro tutorials as a cluster deliverable and kind of make that one of our working objectives over the next year to 2 years in the cluster, that means we want to be able to provide some kind of useful, valuable insight for scientists or science-oriented users. I think Renee kind of touched on that when she said, farmers could also use this, but do we want them to apply best practices in environmental science when they do so? Yes. So those are the kinds of things that would really differentiate the kinds of micro tutorials we're talking about from kind of a vanilla Arduino tutorial online. We're really talking about what are some of the aspects of data quality and these sorts of things that we want to inject these concepts in. So that hopefully that provides a little bit of background as to what our motivation is, why we don't think we're just probably not reinventing the wheel here. And I think this has also grown up out of the need from, us and our students and other people's students are constantly coming up with these questions of how do we get into these things and how do we apply them. So maybe this is our opportunity to start a process, create a template, create a procedure where those of us who aren't media savvy can still kind of follow the instructions and come out with something useful. It's a few minutes long. So
Right. Yeah. And just another comment on that, I was just reminded. So at McMurdo, we do research in Antarctica, and we are, not a lot of people can go down there. And so we had this idea sort of coincidentally that the next time we are allowed to go to the field, we might want to not only create videos to show people our site in, kind of in line with the virtual field project that I talked about, but also like, what are some of the challenges that we have in Antarctica with sensor technology, and maybe showcase some of our projects, or how to add a new sensor when it's like freezing cold and blowing wind or something like that. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of applications and a lot of directions that this could go.
So I suggest for this, we do the breakouts and we set a time limit and we bring everyone back, and then there's someone in the breakouts take notes in each group, and then kind of summarize the highlights back together as a group. What do you think is, looking at the clock here, what do you think is going to be a good breakout time frame, Renee or Megan, if you've been watching the conference evolve?
Like 20 minutes or come back at 5 o'clock or something like that.
Yeah, kind of what I was thinking. Yep, 20 to 30 minutes would be good. And then we come back and we do kind of maybe a half hour or so roundup, and we'll be in good shape. Ethan?
Yep, I would suggest 20 minutes. And then I think what we often miss in our calls is kind of a synthesis. And so let's keep a whole half hour for that. It's going to be reporting out first and then some synthesizing. So it's a bunch of other activities. So that's my thing. We'll get a lot of the ideas out at first in the first 20 minutes. It'll be just, rolling off our tongues. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so I'm going to create 2 rooms and then leave people in the main room too, so the recording catches at least some discussion. So just give me a minute for that.
And it could be that Renee, myself, and Christina, for example, are all in separate rooms since we're cluster facilitators.
Gotcha. All right, I'm going to open the rooms. They'll close after 21 minutes, I'll give you. And we're off. And so Scotty, Micah, Steve, Martha, and I will stay in this room.
That's why I didn't get an invite. Got it.
That's right. James, you should have gotten an invite to room 1.
We're going to call ourselves room 3.
We're unassigned.
Okay. I'm going to go down to breakout group 3.
Oh, for note purposes, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do have our list of discussion topics here, and each one of these groups is going to have a different mix of folks with experience. You know what? I'm going to actually throw a little bit of a curveball here. Micah is new to this group, and the rest of us are part of this group and have heard this conversation in our previous meeting. Does this sound crazy to you, Micah? And given that you're involved to a certain degree in the same kinds of workflows, what are your comments on what Renee just kind of outlined as a goal for micro tutorials and what we should be focused on in audience?
Well, let's see. I like the idea. So I guess my questions are, as kind of a newcomer to all this, is I really don't know what's out there already. I know that there are tutorials, and I haven't looked very much on my own. But I know there's like written tutorials. There's a lot of if you're just talking about, say, like Raspberry Pi or something, there's a lot of how-tos, a lot of written tutorials. I haven't seen much in the way of video content, and that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because honestly, I haven't really looked for it yet. But just speaking from my own experience in terms of, when I'm I need to fix something around my house, for example, the first thing I do is look for the YouTube video. So that might just be me. So my first reaction is, that would be a great platform. And if something like that doesn't exist, I think it's a great idea to make it.
Might I?
Thank you for the feedback. Yeah, Megan.
I might just, Scotty, your audio keeps getting really quiet, so I'm sorry that it might just be me, but
No.
I would just add that to the data help desk, something that Esip helps to run, these short tutorials have become really popular. It's actually become a wonderful challenge to manage all of these short videos that folks are making for this event. So I absolutely think it's like in high demand in the general broader data management realm. I think it takes, it's good to empower people to like go ahead and do this. But it's actually really hard to do well. I mean, that's why you're having this session. So I'm not telling you anything new, but deciding on the length, the level of granularity, how to keep them up to date, how to organize them as soon as, you know, it takes off that like, this is a great thing, a great way to communicate with each other. And then I would say, you know, right, because we have 100 resources that have been contributed to the data help desk. And now people are like, I can't, this is unwieldy. How do I agree YouTube is great. So I would just challenge you to think about, and you've asked this, so I'm just repeating your statements, you know, what videos help you personally, the people who are showing up here and have needs to learn things, and what would be a good advertisement for the cluster as a collection of resources and the types of things people get involved in if they engage with you further.
Cool. So I have one question back to you, Megan, and that is on the issue of ESIP or envirosensing and ESIP branding that was brought up. I'm gonna ask you because you're one of the ESIP leadership representatives here, so maybe you have some feedback for us on that.
So you just mean using ESIP in your videos or saying this is a cluster output, basically?
So if for example, over the course of some time period, we developed essentially a recipe booklet, if Martha wanted to go create a ESIP envirosensing cluster compatible micro tutorial on installing near surface soil temperature sensors, she would go and grab this folder of material, which could be background slides, could be bullet points, like make sure you spend, or even a schedule, like you have, you know, if you're going to do a 4-minute video, here's what you should spend each minute on, kind of thing. And so we give her like the solution to the recipe to follow, and then she would go out there and you know, make it happen, right? So the question is on branding related to ESIP. If we're talking about organizing these under the cluster, if we're talking about referencing the cluster and ESIP in the video more than once, likely. What is it something that for the brand purposes of branding, we need to coordinate closely with you and the leadership group to make sure that we're following the guidelines?
Yeah, and that's a conversation we should definitely have. I think ESIP has a formal endorsements process that very few resources actually go through to get approved by the broader assembly. I don't envision that this collection of resources would ever go that far, but then you're kind of in this gray area where the outputs really are the product of the specific people that put them together, which still needs to be associated, even if you call that an output of the cluster, because the cluster's composition changes at any given time. And I think there are some questions that ESIP needs to answer, you know, the leadership about, you know, when can you stick the ESIP brand name on it? I think we generally have been, you know, not too controlling about that, but there are more and more questions as we're growing about, you know, how can you call that an ESIP recommendation if it hasn't been endorsed? And it's really just these people kind of pushing what they believe. So the short answer is I appreciate that you're thinking about that, and it's definitely a conversation we should have.
Yeah, and you know, maybe, you know, like Steve thinking about policy and how those sort, you know, what are the unintended consequences that could occur, and, you know, things of that nature, because we do want to give ESIP the run it deserves for facilitating all of this. I would really prefer, and also the data should be organized under an ESIP banner, I believe, because I'm going to come and go, Renee's going to come and go, we're all going to come and go. But, you know, such practices persist. Yeah. So we got to think about, like, what are those long-term implications?
Just a couple of things. One sidebar note, Scotty, I think I've diagnosed when you start talking, you're very quiet, and I think your system is doing some sort of automatic volume adjust, but it takes it, like, there's a lag time of like several seconds before it adjusts the volume. So that's just kind of a weird fluke that I now recognize it's doing. So you're usually okay after the first several seconds when you're talking, but you're very quiet when you first start, just to be aware of that. And yeah, I mean, there's a long distance between endorsement and acknowledgement. So at a minimum, you know, we could be sure to acknowledge, you know, support or whatever from Esip, or maybe we don't even want to use that word, but to make sure that Esip gets acknowledgement, but not word it in such a way that it sounds like we're saying that Esip has officially endorsed whatever the product is. So that's my quick reaction.
NSF style disclaimers.
Yeah.
Okay, well, very good. Martha, you're muted.
Oh, just that way we'd sound like we came from somewhere instead of just, you know, random people, hey, we're putting together these little tutorials. But while I'm talking, this is kind of a different subject, but I wanted to bring up how we would actually record these, because in my few times of making little microcircuits and Arduinos and stuff, it's very teeny tiny precise work. So in order to have things realistically recorded, you'd need to have some sort of macro or zoom camera to do so, instead of just saying, okay, then you just get the little wire and you put it on this thing and then it connects. You know, that type of language isn't as helpful as having pictures of something and saying, here's how we did it. And I think a number of us in this EnviroSensing cluster are pretty avid, I don't know if photographer is the right word, but image producers, people who like images and considering how they are arrived at. So that might be a separate conversation, but so that if we get a tutorial and it's about, say, James Gallagher making a you know, a little microcircuit, you can really see what he's doing instead of just like there's a guy sitting at a bench, but you can't really tell what he's doing. So just thought I'd throw that one out there.
Well, that sounds like a video production matter in part, Martha, that, you know, kind of recognizing when you want to edit and cut between the video and maybe a, you know, an image or a diagram, or at least a photo that depicts the close-up.
Right.
And maybe it has some labeling applied to it. So, and also just thinking about review, if we think in terms of, you know, there's sort of a rough draft, a rough cut that goes through some sort of group review so that people can offer feedback and say, well, at this point, I couldn't figure out what, you know, what James was doing. So, you know, maybe that needs some more clarity, just a little tweak there. I wanted to riff off of what Micah said earlier, and, you know, because it helped get me thinking. I think there's multiple types of videos to think about. Like, to me, it would be really cool to have some videos that just sort of are like little stories or case studies or whatever on really cool things that people are doing, you know, that they'd like to share, that, but with a certain purpose, like attracting more interest, you know, where we think that people will look at that and go, wow, that's really cool, you know, and I didn't know you could do that kind of reaction. And just sort of helping people to understand the art of the possible, you know, that some types of sensing may now be possible that they didn't realize were achievable. So I see that as one whole area. And then there's another whole area that's more of the how to, kind of the practical, if you want to do it. And, you know, we suggest, I'm making this up, but we suggest that you attempt to go with an open hardware, open source software approach. Here's some how to stuff to help you get started. So, end of spiel.
There you go.
I agree with that. I like the idea of applications versus how-to themes. I also think that our recipe would want to follow we would basically want to inject some guidance that allowed people to just use their smartphones. Smartphones are getting pretty good these days. I was going to show you, if my background will allow, here's a macro lens
Oh
on
yeah.
my smartphone that is actually really high quality and not that expensive. And
Cool.
so for circuitry work, you know, if I set it up just a little stand right here and put the soldering iron there in front of it, I think, you know, I would be able to show like surface mount level detail. If, you know, we're not going to have people soldering surface mount, but you get the idea. Yeah.
There you go. Good one.
Alleged microscope that connects to your phone, right? Which I haven't worked with yet, but I have it. Yeah.
I think that we're at this point where all of us have access, if we don't have it in hand already, to pretty much all the tools necessary to do this. And the video editing itself is also, like, again, our recipe wouldn't, you know, you don't need to be a Premiere Pro user. You know, if you used iMovie or Windows Movie Maker to insert the images and cuts and transitions, it's all doable.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, because I've done a little bit of video production there, and it is very, very time consuming. And that's what we're going to run up against, is how, if we're going to be successful in doing this as a way to document and even replace in-person work and provide value like an exponential scale, as opposed to the 15 people that come to a workshop, we're going to have to come up with the techniques and tools to let people like Martha and James easily make one of these, as opposed to this is going to take you all year kind of thing. And that's to me is going to be the main challenge, is can we figure out a workflow that's simple enough, that provides good enough quality to deliver the value that, you know, anyone with a little bit of technical capability, and those of us who are used to making presentations, you know, we might adapt already to making this work.
Yeah.
There's got to be some resources out there to figure out some shortcuts. I mean, it's definitely, I'm sure it's an art. I just dropped in the notes in case anyone's interested. I just stumbled upon this when I was looking to buy a chainsaw recently. So you don't have to be interested in power tools, but this is just someone's YouTube channel who does these, you know, it's basically self-directed reviews of various like home tools or power equipment. And like the videos are great. He gets like tens of millions of views on these things. And I think it's a lot to do with just like the editing, and he has like great graphics that go on top of, you know, explaining what he's doing. So I don't know, I think just like doing some research and learning, you know, from like successful YouTube, you know, video production efforts out there might go a long ways. But I know it's difficult. You know, the little bit of work I've done with video.
So we got a little bit of time left, but not tons. And you know, I don't want to put you on the spot again, Mike, or anything, but you know, given that you're kind of new to this cluster, did you have some anything that you'd like to ask, general questions about, you know, what we're trying to do, what our objectives are, or topics that you are interested in that might help you in your field? So we've had a couple of oceans people stick their nose in before, but largely the cluster's grown out of terrestrial envirosensing, but the workflows are very similar. And a lot of times the large ocean nets have better data management than the terrestrial networks do for a host of reasons. And so we would love to have someone from oceans come and participate more. So I'm going to hijack a little bit of our time to just ask you, like, did you have any questions for us, or feedback on what you were hoping to get here or get out of this?
Yes and no, I guess. So I'm, like I said in the intro, I'm really more of work on the data management side. So I have people that I work with who you know, have done like ocean engineering, and you know, are hands-on with, you know, the more sophisticated you know, buoys and sensors that we use. And unfortunately I can't really speak to any of that, but I think, at least from my perspective, and you know, they probably would have a slightly different perspective. I think just learning about the, you know, high level technologies involved. So like the data logger systems, telemetry, you know, I don't know, probably just going to name everything you guys do, I guess, but.
Yeah, and you did mention like the software infrastructures and point-to-point transfer software protocols and things like that, or point to multipoint. And there's a whole group of us that have been bringing those topics in the last couple of years. So some of the main contributors weren't aren't in this session, but show up regularly on calls. And so if you want to, you know, find out more about, you know, how people are using things like MQTT or data versioning or data transformations, or, you know, what's efficient quality tracking solutions and things like that. There's a lot of activity in this cluster related to those topics, and I'm sure you'd be able to bring some input. So, yeah, just because you're not a hardware geek, like, don't feel left out at all. Although if you got a Still 440, if you bought a Still 440 after watching that video on chainsaws, then you're in good company.
Actually, I went with the Makita, but that's all right.
Oh, I see.
But well, actually, yeah, I mean, maybe what I'll do is try to pass the message back to some of the people that I worked with. So,
sure.
So our organization is a little squirrely because a lot of those people don't actually work for NOAA, but I think they'd still be able to join the cluster if they had the time, if they were, you know, interested.
Yeah, and I mean, also, well, maybe I'll follow up with Renee later, but we're also always looking for external people, external to the cluster, to come in and give a little talk occasionally on what it is that they're working on, something cool they presented on recently, just so that we keep our minds a little bit open and we don't become too much of an echo chamber. So
Megan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the clusters are pretty much open to anyone who's interested, right? So you wouldn't have to be a NOAA employee. You could be, you know, someone coming in who has maybe some connection, Micah, to your group in NOAA, but they don't have to be an employee. You know, they basically just have to be interested.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm sure that they'd qualify. I mean, they're grantees that we work with. So, you know, so I think that they would definitely make the cut. I think it's just a question of awareness. So, you know, I actually wasn't aware about this cluster. I haven't really been focusing on this area much until the last year. So probably my own fault, but I didn't know about it until 6 months ago or so. So, so yeah, I can definitely pass along the info and might get some takers.
Looks like people are returning from the other groups now. One last point I wanted to throw out was thinking about work that Esip has been doing over the years. I actually see a connection with the whole ontology type of area, that if you've got lots of sensors sensing different things, can you start to think about how that begins to map to some of the ontology work? And the idea of a new sensor comes online and it's basically able to talk to some framework and explain, this is what I am, this is where I am, this is what I'm sensing, where the what I'm sensing part, you know, begins to relate to, I think, to the ontology work. So that's kind of another aspect maybe of the data management component,
right,
just to throw out.
Yeah, and that there's a couple of different projects that this cluster supported that touch that, and some of those people still show up occasionally. They kind of, you know, throttle back their efforts, but yeah, those certainly exist. And I think right now we're still dealing with like sensor manufacturer adoption and things of this nature. We're waiting for standards to get just a little bit better in the IoT world, maybe. It's like we're all coming back.
Yeah,
that's an important thing.
They're now in the main session.
Well, Renee, looks like we're coming back. How did it go?
I think our group had a good discussion. So it was me and James, Cindy, Lisa, and it's not your name, Joseph.
Oh, I can
wait a minute. I was like, wait a minute, who is Jason? So we kind of just had a free-form discussion, and some of the things that came out of our group, there was quite a bit of interest in the data management side of this. And you go out and throw a whole bunch of sensors somewhere, and it's relatively easy and cheap to do so, especially when we talk about citizen science. But then what do you do when you get the data? And as a data manager who has a lot of experience on the field side and then transitioned into data management, I certainly can appreciate those issues. Joseph had a cool idea about how we might want to structure these videos. So we could have, we have these flowcharts on our wiki page, and maybe we can animate those flowcharts. And when he was talking about this, I was thinking about a Prezi style presentation where you kind of like zoom into the topic, or you have like your field site and then you zoom into specific areas. And so that could be cool. And then we had some discussion about incentives. So all of us are busy, and how, we may have this interest in spreading knowledge to the community, but without things like a grant who's going to pay a month of our salary, or being able to publish this work. So can we publish these videos in a journal? For example, geoinformatics was suggested as a possible journal. I went to an Esip session yesterday where they talked about publishing a Jupyter Notebooks workflow in an AGU journal. And these are cool ideas. I do think as an academic that we should talk a little bit more about publishing in this group, because there's some incentive there, especially for early career. In terms of like best practices, yeah, it's a big deal, and a lot of groups are having experience with this. For example, sorry, Lisa was talking about in her organization, a lot of the in-person trainings about protocols and such need to be converted to virtual, and there's a lot of detail in those efforts that needs to be thought about. 5 minutes might be too long for some, but it might be too short for other concepts. And James talked about some work that he is currently funded to do to develop. They were initially supposed to be doing these in-person software workshops, and because of COVID, they've had to transition to a virtual model. And so he has some experience doing that on the software side. And so maybe he will be a good resource for us on the hardware side. And maybe we just need to think about putting together like a basic package of what people can buy. So I think I touched on most everything that we talked about. Anything I missed, others in the group, or anything else? Any other comments? Jay.
Yeah. Did you, by chance, talk about the ocean best practice system in your discussions? I do apologize coming late. We just finished a POGO panel on indigenous observations and community-based monitoring, which was fascinating, and I'm sorry for the delay. Did you talk about the ocean best practices at all?
I didn't, but in the intro, I did mention where should we be storing these videos, and data repositories as a general theme. But I think we also need to be mindful of like how easy it is for people to access these. So I think it's important to like, yeah, get a DOI, put it in a repository. But I think, I mean, these are my own perspectives about, like we should make these easy to find, even outside a repository, because people may not know to go to the ocean repository to look for that, if that makes sense. Group 2, do you want to report out? I can't hear you, Ethan.
Oh,
Now I can.
okay. I'll just crank up my volume a little bit. How's that? Good, good. So on the group 2 breakout notes page, if you want to just go there and follow along instead of me sharing, it's harder. So first off, we were trying to figure out who the target audience is, and also the associated purpose. That's been some of our training about like pairing up an audience and the purpose. So maybe we were thinking narrowly, Renee, because I thought I heard you say that this would be for ESIP members, but maybe it's also for all earth science data folks. And the purpose, though, is to help those people learn how to use environmental sensors and manage the associated data, kind of broadly. I think, again, we'll have to figure out how to scope that so that it's doesn't cover basics that other parties cover. Skill levels, I think we would start with things that are all relatively basic, though, and then move to complex topics. We don't have anything more specific than that for now. And again, broader, narrow, start with broad and keep moving more narrow based on some audience feedback. And speaking of feedback, we were thinking maybe of trying to survey ESIP members, thanks for the highlight, and asking them, what are you interested in? We could give them a set of topics that we think they'd be interested in, maybe 5 or 10 topics, and then let them write in another 5 topics, and ideally even have them rank those. And then, you know, I don't think our sample size is going to be that big. I don't know, at most 50 people or something, and someone on this call or somewhere at ESIP, someone must know how to integrate all that number of responses. And anyways, use that to guide things that people are most interested in. And at the same time, oh, actually, if you look at the farther down, there's a set of focus on cluster document for topics. On the EnviroSensors cluster page, there's a document that was created several years ago, and it already had a bunch of these topics. So, you know, we don't want to recreate the topics that might make sense broadly. So maybe those are some of the offerings we suggest as topics in this survey. But the last bullet in that part is we should figure out what's already been done so that we don't try to fill a gap that doesn't exist, and instead we just recreate the wheel. To mix a few more metaphors, you know, we should provide that as a resource as well. You know, resources on where to site sensors, how to make sure that you have power, what are the ways that the sensor data is transmitted, and so on, just to give people basics. And then maybe we focus on stuff that's earth science specific. I don't know. We didn't talk about this. I just put it in myself here. I think the videos in general are good if they're kind of short. Ideally, they can be short, but also be parts of a little package. So for each tutorial, maybe you'd be able to know what other tutorials are related to that. So if you're dealing with sensor site and platform selection, maybe there are 5 tutorials, each one kind of short, and they can be sequential, or people could just pick off whichever ones they're most interested in. But they want to sit for a longer time and learn a lot about one whole larger topic, they can. If they want to just take a bite during a break and they don't mind watching their screen for another 15 minutes, they can do that too. Where should they be hosted? Dan likes the idea of YouTube, but he wants to make sure that there's some DOI persistence capability. I don't know, and he didn't know if YouTube did that. That's just a concern to keep in mind. And yeah, down near the bottom, I'm highlighting it. I don't know if you can see. It's like the 4th or 5th bullet from the bottom where it says how to get started. What should our standard template look like? So, you know, how to get started and where to find basics. And we didn't really get farther beyond that. And at the bottom is just our own reference for all those links to the EnviroSensor document.
Great.
Yeah, That sounds great. Yeah, and just one comment before we get to the next breakout report. So I think there is interest in tying into those topics that are on the wiki page. I mean, that was work that was done a long time ago and probably needs updating. And I mean, I think it's very reasonable to tie into those topics. So thanks. Next.
One last thing I want to mention about Daniel Fuca too, as well, is that he said maybe we also make a list of the stuff that the topics that we have the expertise or desire to make tutorials about.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily being customer centric, but again, if we find that the customer wants it, then we know that we have a supplier. If not, we'll have to outsource that supplier somehow.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Okay, who's reporting in 3? Scotty?
3. So Micah, Megan, Steve, Martha, and myself, we're in this group 3, and you're going to see a bunch of familiar themes in here. So lit review, what's out there already? Is this something that when we go to make a video, someone goes to make a video, is the first thing that they do? Do they go and look to see, you know, is before they do their storyboard or whatever, do they see what's available out there already, and make sure that they're not, you know, fully duplicating something else? Again, if our guidance is designed to insert these different best practices themes, maybe there's a good chance that we can adapt, or, you know, we could even show links to, you know, if you just want to know the basics about, you know, soldering together on breadboards, you really want to go look at this one over here. If you want to know how to make this thing for this application, watch this. Data management. So Megan brought up that the data help desk is in Esip is seeing a high demand for these kinds of media. This is the way people are ingesting their information more and more, are these micro video tutorial formats. We should think about how to keep them organized. And this was all mentioned already, right? How do you associate a video with a particular topic and that sort of thing? My take on that is that YouTube's platform, for example, already is set up to do this. You can make videos members of different collections and this sort of thing. So think about your favorite YouTube channel, and they've got a lot of crossover. So if you know, like Everything Music by Rick Beato, you can go see like, you know, what makes a song great, or you could see like top 20 guitar riffs, but the same video might be in each collection. There's a way to cross-link those. So, but we do want to think about that. We do want to think about the crossover to the persistence that I think Daniel brought up, that is kind of the underpinnings of Esip, like how do we generate, protect, and preserve and document data. Branding, we brought this up because we had Megan in the group. So because she could give us some first thoughts about Esip branding. And this is going to be an interesting conversation because in academia, you have the freedom of academia. We generally are pretty good about acknowledging Esip, but if we want to be consistent about how we do this, we should probably provide some guidance in our template about how to do this. And that's something that Esip, like maybe if we come up with our first set of ideas, like, well, we think we should, you know, mention it in the intro or have the logo in the intro, and then in the acknowledgements at the end, we list, you know, we acknowledge Esip in some way. Then we'd have to present that to Esip leadership, and they'd have to look at it and say, is this something that we want to put in there, or should we have some kind of like NSF disclaimer? You know, this represents the ideas and, you know, crazy schemes of scientists that might be funded by us, but we're not taking any responsibility for it. So, you know, something along those lines. Then a review process, what about that? So could we in the cluster facilitate some kind of process where there's 2 stages to making a video? The first stage is maybe you do your storyboard rough cut, and then you bring it back to the cluster and say, what do y'all think? Did I leave something major out or something? So just considering, should we have a review process, or should we just, you know, have a template, make it match this and wind it up and let it go? there's a lot of for and against in there. Themes. So there's how-tos, which might be very specific in terms of here's the coding for this, or here's how you do this soldering, or here's how you wire this stuff together, here's how you deploy this oil sensor. Then there's an application, which is more tied to maybe those themes in our best practices already. So, you know, a 3-minute video on site selection for mountain climate measurements. Maybe that's something I would need to do. That's more of an application rather than an how-to. So that's one way to think about breaking these out. And then the logistics. So how do you make a relatively reasonably high quality production video now that, you know, people will like and want to view more of? I am going to argue that modern smartphones are so good that in terms of picture quality, it's totally doable. And there's a number of different attachments that you can purchase, like macro lenses and these sorts of things, or even microscope, plug in little microscope attachments that make it possible to do. You could probably do everything that we want to do with a smartphone without getting crazy. But we would want to provide some guidance on this and in the template and say, you know, here's, you know, set to wide angle if you're trying to do this kind of shot, or set, you know, here's a couple of different adapters that might work if you're trying to really focus in on something small. And of course, how the video looks, so the production. So Micah brought up a good example of you know, video editing and production tips. And again, think of your favorite YouTube channel. Some of them are way overproduced, some of them are not overproduced. There's going to be a line in there somewhere where you try to figure out, like, okay, what's a nice intro, what are section breaks, and what's a nice ending. So those are things that we probably want to compile and as a group, and then put that into our template. And again, I think YouTubers have all this stuff figured out, and we can sort of pick and choose from the practices that are in there and leverage as much of that very mature community, mature in terms of time, not necessarily in terms of content, as we can. All right, back to you, Renee.
Great. Yeah, and with respect to equipment, I completely agree with the smartphone assessment. So the virtual field project, they have put together sort of the basic kit that you would need for creating videos in the field. Now, some of the videos that we're talking about here in this group wouldn't be taken outside, and that simplifies things a little bit because outside you have to deal with things like noise. And I think, you know, I have an iPhone, I have a handheld gimbal stabilizer, I have a tripod, I have a microphone, and the tripod and the iPhone are my own, but the gimbal and the microphone and the windscreen probably comes to less than $200. So it's a low point of entry, and there are even cheaper solutions than what I have that work just fine. And so some of those recommendations have already been made. We have less than 10 minutes left. I like Ethan's idea of trying to synthesize what has come out of this. We do see some overlapping themes. It does sound like, you know, putting these collections somewhere like YouTube might be a good option, but we also need to tie those in with a persistent identifier via a repository or a like a Zenodo connection or something like that. Those are things that we can sort out. And yeah, I'm not doing a very good job of synthesizing here. Scotty, have you been writing notes about what our takeaways are, or?
You know, I'm just relying on the various breakout group summaries as the notes. I feel like, you know, I got to go last, so I got to stitch everything, you know, together a little bit.
Right.
I feel like there are some clear next steps for synthesis, and one of these would be those kind of the template development, and that's, you know, matching the needs with the abilities, for example, and saying, okay, you know, maybe here's a good proto production storyboard type of product. And ultimately, like we're gonna have to have a few examples, the guinea pigs there for Daniel. We're gonna have to have a couple people step up that really wanted to do this and go through that exercise once we've put together kind of the first draft package. And we go through this process as a cluster, we see how it goes, and then refine it, and we find the bugs. I think that's, now how do we incorporate this into our meetings and our activities and timelines? Some of that's well, like everything in ESIP, it's going to depend on the volunteerism present, right? So that's what we're going to be looking at.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I envision that this conversation will continue at the March meeting, cluster meeting. We can, in the meantime, sort of summarize these thoughts a little bit more, and then come back together and figure out like what are our actual steps, because we don't have enough time to do that today. I'm curious to hear from Megan about the data help desk and what kind of feedback you're hearing there about videos.
It's mostly anecdotal, but both the folks who are creating them and the folks who are consuming them, it just seems to be easier than looking at a one-pager or having to look through a long presentation or webinar even to learn about things. I think the digestible bits and things that are easily kind of, you can quickly decide, is this what I'm interested in? Will this help me with my next step? Is really well liked.
Cool. Yes. Okay. Yes. Jay, I like that. Let's talk about the ocean best practices in March, and you can share with us some more of those capabilities then. And any other thoughts?
We talked a lot about videos as a substitute for in-person workshops and tutorials and things like that. But we did also talk about some data management issues, at least in the one breakout session. And Martha, you might have mentioned those as well in your breakout session. Martha and I have been talking about this stuff and these OGC specifications. And we probably, that's very different than the hands-on videos, right? It's very different, but it's also very important because it's, because the thing that makes this cluster not just a how to, like, why do you need a current limiting resistor with a diode, right? I mean, that's like a general piece of circuit theory, right? The thing that makes this group different is that it's about science. And we want to have data that are not just data, but that are valid, that we know are valid, that are useful in in this context. And so the management issue is important. And I think, Martha brought up this with me, that OGC has done these specifications and we should probably look into them. And I think this cluster is a place to do that as well, because that's the place where we can synthesize the work from these other domains and say, we can repurpose this other work.
Yeah, and I think that ties in well to having Jay talk about his work on the data management side, and then of course, I can maybe share a little bit about what the LTER does in this realm. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back to one other area that I think has a lot of potential, which is kind of casting a broader net to look for really cool things that we discover that people are doing who maybe aren't currently involved with ESIP, but what they're doing, does relate to enviro sensing, and it's really cool. It's something that perhaps merits some attention and might give us some ideas. So just to throw out an example to illustrate the point, I saw recently that the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology has built a tool that they call BirdNet that essentially, yeah, some of you know it, right? So BirdNet is listening, right? It's got a mic. I think it's Raspberry Pi based, but it's listening to the sound out there, and it actually uses, AI. They did, I think, machine learning. It has an edge computing model. So it essentially tells you what's chirping out there right now with some degree of a confidence, low or maybe high confidence. So to me, that is a really cool, thought-provoking thing that's out there that maybe would offer ideas, for some other applications. So just to kind of think about stuff like that maybe we want to look at and, show off, call attention to, kick around. Could we generalize anything from some of these things? So that's just an example, but I do think it's pretty cool.
Dan is being really low key, but Dan has actually done some of that stuff with embedding TensorFlow machines in the field to sense mosquitoes. I'm right about this, aren't I, Dan?
You are right, and that was one that we were talking about scheduling sometime in the near future, but might be is one that I'm offering. It wouldn't fit into the 15-minute group, but definitely into the hour and a half type of session.
Yeah, I wonder if you could listen for different things like snowfall and rainfall.
Rainfall, actually, the original, your original rain gauges were sound-based.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, there's someone out there right now advertising on Facebook where I think that's the way that they do the rain sensing is auditory.
Yeah, we built up some rainfall sensors that were auditory, and they actually worked fairly well. The nice part about the auditory rain sensors, I forget the name of them off the top of my head for some reason, but they don't have to be maintained as well. There's not as much maintenance to it.
Oh, right.
Renee, you know what those are called, right? What are the sound waves?
No, that's the first I've heard of it actually, but it reminds me of discussion I was having with one of the co-PIs in McMurdo about our streams only flow for 2 months out of the year at most, and whether there was some way that we could put some sensor out there to listen to the water flowing as a complement to our stream gauges. So we are out of time, so I'm going to suggest that we all think about this, think about what we've talked about today, and if you have some additional thoughts to send them to me and Scotty, and we can come back together in March and maybe make some more progress on this. I think this has been really good. I think we got a lot of good conversations today. So thank you all for coming and contributing and being interested.